My name is Paulette Reynolds, and at 33, I was the youngest patent attorney to ever make senior counsel at Geneva Life Pharmaceuticals. For 7 years, I poured my soul into protecting a revolutionary cancer treatment that would have made the company $5 billion. But that Tuesday morning CEO, Maxwell Harrison, stood at the head of the mahogany conference table, looked me dead in the eyes, and said those words, "Terminated effective immediately." I simply nodded, said thank you, and walked out. What happened next changed the pharmaceutical industry forever. Before I tell you my story, let me know where you're watching from in the comments. Hit that subscribe button if you've ever stood up to workplace injustice, because trust me, what happened after I closed that boardroom door will make your jaw drop. I remember the day Amanda Reeves recruited me to Geneva Life. I was 2 years out of Harvard Law, specializing in biotechnology patent law, and already making a name for myself at a prestigious Boston firm. Amanda was the legal director at Geneva Life, then a woman I deeply admired for her integrity and brilliance. She took me to lunch at this little Italian place in Cambridge and laid out a vision that captivated me. "Paulette, what we're doing at Geneva Life isn't just business," she said, twirling linguine around her fork. "The patents we protect literally save lives. Our researchers have made breakthroughs in targeted cancer therapies that could change oncology forever." The passion in her eyes was contagious. I had gone into patent law because I wanted my work to matter, not just fill the coffers of tech giants fighting over who invented the rounded corner on a smartphone. Here was a chance to use my legal expertise to help bring life-saving treatments to people who desperately needed them. When Amanda showed me around the Geneva Life campus the following week, I was sold. The laboratories buzzed with energy. Researchers collaborated in open workspaces, sharing ideas freely. The CEO at the time, Maxwell Harrison, came across as a visionary, a former medical researcher himself, who understood both the science and the business. He spoke about patients first, profits second. I signed my contract that afternoon. Those first few years were everything I hoped for. I worked closely with the research teams, helping them navigate the complex world of patent applications, while learning enough about the science to effectively protect their innovations. That's when I met Dr. Eleanor Rhodes. Eleanor was a genetic researcher with the kind of brilliant mind that comes along once in a generation. While most cancer researchers were still focusing on traditional chemotherapy agents, Eleanor was pioneering an entirely new approach, a targeted therapy that could essentially reprogram cancer cells to self-destruct without harming healthy tissue. The beauty of it, Eleanor explained to me one evening, as we shared takeout in her lab, is that it works on genetic markers common to multiple types of cancer. This isn't just a treatment for one specific cancer. It could work on dozens. We became fast friends, Eleanor and I. She helped me understand the science in layman's terms, and I helped her document her work in ways that would ensure robust patent protection. Together with my colleague Marcus Daniels from the legal department, we formed a formidable team. Marcus was the kind of lawyer who remembered every precedent and could recite patent case law from memory. Where I was sometimes passionate and outspoken, Marcus was measured and strategic. "Paulette," he would say, "it's not enough to be right. We have to be unassailable." His methodical approach balanced my sometimes impulsive nature perfectly. The company culture at Geneva Life was something special in those early days. Rebecca Winters from HR implemented policies that actually supported work-life balance. The CFO, Harold Wright, allocated generous research budgets because he understood that innovation required investment. And board member James Sullivan frequently visited the labs, genuinely interested in the science rather than just the potential profits. Everything changed when the new investors came in during my 4th year. Suddenly, quarterly earnings became the priority. Harold was pressured to cut research budgets. Board meetings became focused on competitor analyses and market share rather than breakthrough treatments. Maxwell Harrison changed too. The man who once walked the labs asking researchers about their work now sequestered himself with financial analysts. His speeches at company meetings shifted from patient impact to shareholder value. I watched this transformation with growing concern. The turning point came when Eleanor made her breakthrough. After years of research, she had developed a delivery system for her targeted therapy that showed remarkable results in preliminary trials. 93% efficacy, almost no side effects. The data was extraordinary. I worked tirelessly on the patent applications. This wasn't just a single patent. It was a complex portfolio of intellectual property covering the genetic markers, the delivery mechanism, the production process, and various potential applications. If properly protected, this would be worth billions and could help millions of patients. Maxwell called me into his office after I filed the initial applications. For a moment, I saw a flash of the old Maxwell, genuinely excited about the potential impact of Eleanor's work. But then, he started asking about exclusivity periods, pricing strategies, and how we could potentially extend the patent to block competitors from entering the space. The conversation left me uneasy. That same week, Rebecca from HR stopped by my office and closed the door. "Just wanted to give you a heads up," she said quietly. "They're bringing in a new COO. Victoria Blackwell from Meridian Pharmaceuticals." I knew Meridian's reputation. They were notorious for acquiring smaller companies with promising drugs, jacking up prices, and cutting research. "Why would Maxwell hire someone from there?" I asked. Rebecca just gave me a sad smile. "The board pushed for it. Just watch yourself, Paulette. The company's changing." I had no idea how prophetic those words would prove to be. Victoria Blackwell arrived like a hurricane in an immaculate business suit, tall, imposing, with a perpetual expression that suggested she was calculating your worth to the company with each glance. Our first meeting was scheduled as a casual introduction over coffee in the executive lounge, but Victoria made it clear this was an evaluation, not a friendly chat. "So you handle our patent portfolio," she stated, not asked, while scanning my resume. "Harvard Law. Impressive. But I see you came directly from Bennett and Ross, rather than an in-house position at another pharmaceutical company." "I did," I replied. "Amanda recruited me specifically for my expertise in biotech patents. I worked with several pharmaceutical clients at Bennett and Ross." Victoria took a sip of her black coffee. "And this cancer treatment patent? I reviewed the filings. 5 billion projected value seems optimistic." "Those projections come directly from finance based on market analysis," I explained. "The treatment is revolutionary. It works across multiple cancer types with minimal side effects. Nothing like it exists on the market." Was all she said, before moving on to interrogate me about patent enforcement strategies and competitor analyses. Within a week of her arrival, the changes began. Victoria implemented what she called operational efficiencies. Research budgets were slashed. Non-essential projects were terminated. Team-building events were canceled. The open-door policy that had fostered collaboration was replaced with formal meeting requests and strict reporting hierarchies. Eleanor came to my office visibly upset after her weekly research budget meeting. "They cut our funding by 40%, Paulette," she said, pacing back and forth. "How am I supposed to conduct proper clinical trials with less than half the resources we planned for?" I promised to speak up at the next executive meeting. When I did, presenting a detailed argument about the long-term value of proper research investment versus short-term savings, Victoria cut me off mid-sentence. "The research budget decisions have been finalized," she said coolly. "Legal's role is to protect our intellectual property, not to opine on research methodology. Please stay in your lane, Paulette." Maxwell, who once would have backed me up, stayed silent, scrolling through his phone during the exchange. The ethical compromises began soon after. First came the price increases on existing medications, not just the standard annual adjustments, but significant hikes that would put life-saving treatments out of reach for many patients. When I raised concerns about the public relations impact, Harold Wright shrugged and said, "The market will bear it." Then, I discovered the patient data issue. While reviewing documents for a routine FDA submission, I noticed references to patient data being used in ways not covered by the consent forms patients had signed. I documented my concerns in a detailed memo, citing specific regulatory requirements and potential legal exposure, and sent it to Victoria Maxwell and the compliance team. 3 days later, I received a curt email from Victoria: "Matter reviewed and determined to be within compliance parameters. No further action required." I wasn't satisfied with that response, so I requested a meeting with Maxwell. When I finally got on his calendar 2 weeks later, he seemed distracted and impatient. "Look, Paulette," Victoria consulted with external counsel on this. "They assured us our data usage is within regulatory guidelines. Your concerns are noted, but we need to move forward." I left his office with a growing knot in my stomach. This wasn't the company I had joined. This wasn't the Maxwell Harrison who had once inspired me. That evening, I received an email from a contact at BioNova Therapeutics, a competitor working in similar research areas. It was a routine professional correspondence about a conference we were both attending, but it mentioned that BioNova was making progress on targeted cancer therapies as well. Out of curiosity, I dug into their recent patent filings. What I found disturbed me. Their approach was different, but aimed at the same general outcome as Eleanor's work. And their research was progressing faster than I expected. With Eleanor's budget cuts, we were in danger of losing our advantage. More concerning was something I discovered while reviewing our own patent applications. In the rush to file quickly, and with the reduced legal staff, Victoria had implemented there was a critical flaw in how we'd structured one of the core patents. It wasn't fatal. We could fix it with a supplementary filing, but it created a vulnerability if anyone knew where to look. I scheduled a meeting with Marcus to discuss the issue. "We need to file an amendment immediately," I told him. "There's a gap in the protection of the delivery mechanism." Marcus looked troubled. "Victoria has implemented a new approval process for all patent filings. Any amendments need to go through her office first, with a full justification and cost-benefit analysis." "This is a no-brainer, Marcus. Without this amendment, we could lose protection for a key component of the treatment." He lowered his voice. "Between us, she's been questioning the value of some of your patent strategies, said they're too aggressive, too expensive to maintain." I felt a chill. She's questioning my professional judgment. Marcus nodded grimly. "Just tread carefully. Prepare a really solid case before you bring this to her." I spent the weekend building that case complete with precedents and a clear analysis of the potential risk. But when I tried to schedule a meeting with Victoria on Monday, her assistant informed me she was booked solid for the next 3 weeks. "This is urgent," I insisted. "It concerns our most valuable patent." "I'll add you to the cancellation list," was all I got in response. That was the first moment I truly understood that I was being deliberately sidelined. The realization felt like a punch to the gut. The exclusion became more blatant over the following months. I was accidentally left off meeting invites for discussions directly relevant to patent strategy. My reports were buried in shared folders rather than distributed to key stakeholders. When important visitors toured the facility, I was no longer asked to present our intellectual property portfolio as I had been in the past. The rumors about restructuring began circulating after Victoria hired Thomas Jennings, a patent attorney from her previous company, without consulting our department. The whispers in the hallway said he was being groomed to replace me. I kept my head down and continued doing my work with absolute professionalism, documenting everything meticulously. If my judgment was going to be questioned, I would have a paper trail showing the careful reasoning behind every decision. Eleanor was facing similar pressures in the research department. Victoria had assigned a new project manager to the cancer treatment program, a man named Gregory Phillips, who had no scientific background but had been Victoria's right hand at Meridian. "He's asking us to skip validation steps," Eleanor told me during one of our now clandestine lunch meetings at a cafe, 2 blocks from the office. When I object, he says I'm being unnecessarily cautious and impeding progress. Document everything I advised her, every request, every objection, every outcome. If anything goes wrong, you need to be able to prove you raised concerns. She nodded grimly. "I've started keeping a separate notebook at home. But, Paulette, I'm worried about what this means for patients down the line. If we cut these corners." I reached across the table and squeezed her hand. "We'll figure this out, Eleanor. There are still good people at Geneva Life who care about doing things right." But those good people were becoming harder to find. Rebecca from HR was placed on a special project that effectively removed her from day-to-day operations. James Sullivan attended fewer board meetings, his influence clearly diminished. Harold Wright, always a numbers man, had fully embraced Victoria's approach to cost-cutting. The confrontation with Victoria came after I discovered she had authorized a patent filing strategy for a secondary application that contradicted our approach on the main patent. When implemented, it would create conflicting claims that could potentially invalidate both patents. I requested an urgent meeting and surprisingly got on her calendar the next day. I came prepared with a comprehensive analysis and several proposed solutions. "This filing strategy creates a legal contradiction," I explained, showing her the specific language in both applications. We need to harmonize these approaches immediately, or we risk undermining our entire patent position. Victoria leaned back in her chair, studying me rather than the documents. You know, Paulette, I've been reviewing your performance history. The abrupt change of subject caught me off guard. My performance. We're discussing a critical patent issue that needs immediate attention. Your approach to patent protection is outdated, she continued as if I hadn't spoken. Overly cautious. Resource-intensive. We need a more agile strategy in today's market. There's nothing agile about filing contradictory patents, I countered, trying to redirect to the actual problem. This isn't about my approach versus yours. This is basic legal coherence. Her eyes narrowed. I've consulted with outside counsel on our overall strategy. They support the direction we're taking. Did you show them these specific applications? Did they identify this contradiction? I don't appreciate your tone, Paulette. Perhaps you should take some time to consider whether your priorities align with the company's new direction. The threat was thinly veiled, but I stood my ground. My priority is protecting Geneva Life's intellectual property. That's my job. She smiled coldly. For now. A week later, Maxwell announced a major partnership deal with Zentron RX, a company known for aggressive marketing tactics and questionable clinical trial practices. The partnership would give Zentron RX co-marketing rights for Eleanor's cancer treatment once it was approved. When I reviewed the draft agreement, alarm bells rang. The contract would give Zentron RX access to our research data before full patent protection was secured. I immediately drafted a detailed memo outlining the risks and sent it to Maxwell, Victoria, and the board. I received no response. The deal was announced publicly the following week, exactly as originally drafted. During this time, Eleanor and I grew closer united in our increasingly isolated positions. We started meeting at her apartment to avoid company scrutiny, sharing our concerns, and trying to devise strategies to protect both the research integrity and the patents. One evening, I received an encrypted email from Rachel Sanderson, a research associate on Eleanor's team. Can we meet privately? There's something you should know. We met at a coffee shop far from the office. Rachel was nervous, constantly checking over her shoulder. They're manipulating the trial data, she whispered. Gregory is selectively reporting results and altering the statistical analysis to make efficacy look higher and side effects look lower. Do you have evidence? I asked. She slid a USB drive across the table. Raw data versus reported data. The differences are subtle but significant. I thanked her for her courage and promised to handle the information carefully. That night, I reviewed everything and felt physically sick. The manipulation wasn't grossly obvious. It was sophisticated statistical maneuvering that would probably pass casual regulatory review, but it fundamentally misrepresented the treatment's performance. The next blow came when I discovered Victoria and Gregory had presented a manufacturing plan that would outsource production to a facility in a country with minimal regulatory oversight. The cost savings were substantial, but the quality control risks were enormous. For a precision cancer treatment, even minor manufacturing inconsistencies could be dangerous or deadly for patients. I tried every proper channel to address these issues. I scheduled meetings that were canceled. I sent emails that received no response. I even attempted to reach James Sullivan directly, only to learn he was reconsidering his position on the board due to health concerns. The final straw came when I learned that Maxwell and Victoria were preparing a press release that positioned them as the visionary leaders behind the cancer treatment breakthrough, with only a passing mention of Eleanor's research team. The draft credited Maxwell with guiding the research direction and Victoria with accelerating the development process, both blatant falsehoods. When I showed Eleanor the draft, she broke down in tears. 7 years of my life, she said, my research, my ideas, my endless nights in the lab, and they're just taking it. I held her while she cried, my own anger building. I won't let them get away with this, Eleanor. I promise you. What I didn't tell her was that I was already documenting everything and consulting privately with an attorney friend about whistleblower protections. I knew we were approaching a breaking point. What I didn't know was how soon it would come or how public it would be. The quarterly board meeting fell on a rainy Tuesday in April. I had prepared a comprehensive presentation on our patent portfolio with special emphasis on the core cancer treatment patents. The agenda indicated I would have 30 minutes, my usual time slot for these updates. I arrived early, setting up my materials and laptop while board members filtered in. Maxwell and Victoria entered together deep in conversation. Neither acknowledged me. I noticed Thomas Jennings, Victoria's recent hire, taking a seat in the corner. He had no official role in this meeting. As the last board members arrived, I felt a strange tension in the room. Several avoided eye contact with me. James Sullivan, looking thin and tired, gave me a sad smile before taking his seat. Maxwell called the meeting to order and proceeded through the first agenda items at an unusually brisk pace. When it came time for my presentation, he didn't introduce me as customary. Instead, he remained standing. Before we moved to the patent update, he said, "There's a personnel matter to address." I felt a prickle of unease, but maintained my professional composure. Maxwell turned to face me directly. "Paulette, it has become clear that your vision for Geneva Life's legal strategy no longer aligns with the company's direction. Despite numerous conversations about adapting to our new priorities, you have consistently resisted necessary changes." My heart began pounding in my chest. This was completely unexpected and utterly false. Furthermore, he continued, "We have evidence of insubordination, including unauthorized communications with competitors and undermining leadership decisions." I opened my mouth to protest this outrageous accusation, but he raised his hand. "The executive team and HR have thoroughly reviewed the situation and reached a decision. You are terminated effective immediately." The room fell completely silent. I could hear the rain tapping against the windows and the soft hum of the air conditioning. 20 faces stared at me, some shocked, some uncomfortable, some deliberately blank. With perfect clarity, I realized this had been planned all along. My presentation materials were irrelevant. I was never meant to speak today. I slowly gathered my folders, and closed my laptop. Years of legal training had taught me to never show emotion in professional confrontations. My face remained perfectly composed as I looked Maxwell in the eye. "Thank you," I said simply and turned to leave. That's when Frederick Barton, the new legal director who had replaced Amanda, suddenly jolted in his seat. I saw his face drain of color as he frantically flipped through some documents. "Wait," he said, his voice cracking. "We can't terminate her yet. The Thompson application amendment hasn't been filed. She's the only one who fully understands the structural vulnerabilities in the primary patent. If she leaves now..." "That will be all," Frederick Victoria cut in sharply. But the panic in his eyes was unmistakable. Security was waiting outside the boardroom. A stocky man in a dark suit approached me. "Miss Reynolds, I'll need to escort you to your office to collect your personal items, and then to the exit." I nodded calmly, though my mind was racing. As we walked through the open office area, I could feel dozens of eyes on me. The security guard stood uncomfortably close as I packed my degrees, photos, and personal items into a cardboard box. Marcus appeared at my office door, his face stricken. "Paulette, what happened?" The security guard stepped between us. "Miss Reynolds is not authorized to discuss company matters." Marcus looked from him to me, helpless. I gave him a small, reassuring smile. "It's okay, Marcus. Everything happens for a reason." My phone buzzed as I was escorted to the lobby. A text from Eleanor. "Just heard. They're moving me to a consulting role. They're taking my project. Call me." Outside, the rain had stopped, but the sky remained gray. I placed my box of belongings in my car and sat in the driver's seat, finally allowing myself to feel the full impact of what had just happened. 7 years of my career, gone. My professional reputation potentially in tatters if Maxwell's false allegations spread. I gripped the steering wheel until my knuckles turned white, fighting back tears of anger and betrayal. Then I noticed something. I still had my company ID badge. In their rush to remove me, they had forgotten to take it. More importantly, I still had access to my company email account through my phone. I quickly forwarded key documents to my personal email. Nothing confidential or proprietary, just my own work product and communications that would prove I had acted ethically throughout. Then I composed a brief professional resignation letter and sent it to HR Maxwell and the board, making it clear that I rejected their characterization of my performance and conduct. As I drove home, Frederick Barton's panicked reaction kept replaying in my mind. He was right to be concerned. The patent amendment hadn't been filed because Victoria had repeatedly blocked my attempts to address it, and I was indeed the only person who fully understood the specific vulnerability in the patent structure. That vulnerability was about to become very, very important. The first week after my termination passed in a blur of emotions. I alternated between rage, despair, and anxiety about my future. I barely left my apartment, surviving on delivery food and too much wine, ignoring calls from concerned friends and family. Eleanor came over on day 5 using her spare key after I failed to answer the door. She took one look at me, unwashed in the same pajamas for days, surrounded by takeout containers, and snapped into action. Shower. Now, she ordered, pulling me off the couch. I'm cleaning this place up and then we're talking. An hour later, clean and marginally more human, I sat across from Eleanor at my kitchen table, picking at the healthy meal she'd somehow produced from my neglected refrigerator. "They've completely sidelined me," she said. "Gregory runs all the meetings now. They're pushing the treatment toward clinical trials despite my objections about the rushed safety protocols." "Are you going to quit?" I asked. "Not yet. I need to protect my research as much as possible from the inside." She reached across the table and took my hand. "What about you? What's your plan?" I shook my head. "I don't know. File for unemployment. Update my resume. Cry some more." Eleanor squeezed my hand. "That doesn't sound like the Paulette Reynolds I know, the woman who graduated top of her class at Harvard, the lawyer who once told off a federal judge for misunderstanding biotechnology patent precedent." For the first time in days, I felt a spark of my old self. "You're right, this isn't me." "So, what are we going to do about Geneva Life?" I looked up sharply. They stole your career and my research. I'm not letting that stand." That conversation marked the turning point. The next morning, I woke up clear-headed and focused for the first time since my termination. I pulled out my laptop and began methodically researching patent law precedents related to our specific situation. The vulnerability in Geneva Life's primary patent was technical but significant. In the rush to file, they had used inconsistent language to describe a key component of the delivery mechanism in different sections of the application. This created an ambiguity that, if identified by a competitor, could potentially invalidate the core claim, or at least force a much narrower interpretation than intended. Victoria had prevented me from filing the necessary amendment that would have clarified and strengthened the language. Now that amendment would never be filed, at least not correctly, because no one else understood the nuances of the problem. I called Amanda Reeves, my former mentor who had recruited me to Geneva Life. She had left the company 2 years earlier and was now chief legal officer at BioNova Therapeutics, the same competitor that was working on similar cancer treatment technology. "Paulette, I heard what happened. That's absolutely disgraceful," Amanda said when we met for coffee the following day. "Maxwell Harrison has completely lost his ethical compass." "It's worse than you know," I told her, describing the data manipulation, the manufacturing shortcuts, and the credit theft, all while being careful not to disclose any proprietary information. As a lawyer, I was acutely aware of my continuing ethical obligations despite my termination. Amanda listened intently. "What are you planning to do?" "I'm exploring my options," I said carefully, "including potential whistleblower actions regarding the data manipulation." She nodded thoughtfully. "You know, we've been working on similar technology at BioNova, though our approach is different. We're committed to maintaining the highest ethical standards in our research and manufacturing." "I've reviewed your public patent filings," I acknowledged. "Your approach is innovative, but there are aspects of Geneva Life's treatment that are still unique." "Perhaps," Amanda said with a slight smile. "But patent protection is only as strong as the specific language in the applications, isn't it?" Our eyes met in perfect understanding. Over the next 2 weeks, I consulted with an ethics attorney to ensure that any actions I took would be legally sound. I was walking a delicate line. I wanted justice, not legal liability. Meanwhile, Eleanor continued providing updates from inside Geneva Life. The situation was deteriorating rapidly. Research protocols were being compromised. The manufacturing outsourcing plan was moving forward despite quality concerns. Victoria and Maxwell were pushing for accelerated regulatory review based on the manipulated data. I also learned that Dr. Eleanor wasn't the only one suffering under the new regime. Marcus had been demoted. Rebecca in HR had been forced out entirely. Several researchers from Eleanor's team had quit in protest over the ethical compromises. During this time, I anonymously submitted evidence of data manipulation to the FDA and SEC. I was careful to only include information that demonstrated clear regulatory violations, nothing that would jeopardize the treatment's eventual approval if developed properly. 3 weeks after my termination, Amanda called me with an unexpected proposition. "We'd like to bring you in as a consultant on a specific project," she said. "It would involve analyzing certain public patent filings and providing strategic advice." The meeting at BioNova's headquarters was attended by Amanda, their CEO Daniel Fisher, and their head of oncology research, Dr. Sarah Chen. All three signed confidentiality agreements before we began our discussion, protecting me, not them. "Let me be absolutely clear," I stated at the outset. "I will not disclose any proprietary information about Geneva Life's research or patents. What I can discuss are the public patent filings and general strategic considerations." Daniel nodded. "We understand and respect your professional ethics, Paulette. That's part of why we're interested in working with you." For the next 2 hours, I walked them through my analysis of the publicly available patent filings, highlighting areas where the language created potential vulnerabilities, particularly in the primary patent for the delivery mechanism. "This ambiguity," Amanda noted, pointing to the section I'd identified, could be interpreted to mean the mechanism only applies to the specific protein markers mentioned, not the broader category. That would be one possible interpretation, I agreed. A court might see it differently, but it creates unnecessary uncertainty that could have been avoided with clearer drafting. Sarah leaned forward. "If this interpretation were valid, would that mean alternative approaches targeting the same outcome, but using different markers would fall outside their patent protection?" "Potentially, yes. But I want to be clear. I'm not suggesting BioNova should copy Geneva Life's treatment. Your approach is already distinctive. I'm simply pointing out where the boundaries of their protection may be less solid than they appear." Daniel exchanged glances with Amanda. "There's something else we'd like to discuss. We've been following the situation with Dr. Eleanor Rhodes." "I can't discuss Eleanor's research," I said firmly. "We're not asking you to," Daniel assured me. "What we want to tell you is that we've approved a new research division focused on ethical development of targeted cancer therapies. We need a lead scientist with exactly her expertise. If she were to become available, we would be very interested in speaking with her." I carefully kept my expression neutral, but inside I felt a surge of hope. This could be the perfect solution for Eleanor. Additionally, Amanda added, "We've been reviewing our approach to patent protection for this technology. Our philosophy is that while we certainly want to protect our innovations, we also believe treatments like this should be reasonably accessible to patients who need them. That means responsible pricing and licensing strategies." This was the opposite of Geneva Life's approach under Victoria and Maxwell, who were clearly planning to maximize profits regardless of patient access. "That's commendable," I said sincerely. "We'd like to offer you a consulting agreement," Daniel continued. "Your expertise would be invaluable as we refine our patent strategy in this area." The contract they presented was generous and carefully worded to avoid any ethical conflicts with my previous employment. I would advise on patent strategy for BioNova's existing research, not help them circumvent Geneva Life's legitimate protections. After consulting with my ethics attorney, I signed the agreement. It wasn't about the money. It was about ensuring that this life-saving treatment would eventually reach patients through a company committed to developing it responsibly. Within days of starting my consulting work, I helped BioNova refine their patent approach to clearly distinguish it from Geneva Life's compromised application, while still covering the same therapeutic outcome. I also introduced Eleanor to Sarah Chen. They immediately connected over their shared research interests and ethical standards. 2 weeks later, Eleanor submitted her resignation to Geneva Life. The following day, she accepted a position as BioNova's new director of oncology research. The pieces of justice were slowly falling into place, but the final move was yet to come. Geneva Life's stock dropped 15% the day BioNova announced their new patent filings for targeted cancer therapy, with Dr. Eleanor Rhodes as their newly appointed Director of Oncology Research. Financial analysts immediately recognized the threat to Geneva Life's supposed market dominance in this treatment category. Marcus called me that afternoon. "It's chaos here, Paulette. Frederick has been locked in emergency meetings with Maxwell and Victoria since the announcement hit. They finally realized the problem with the primary patent." "That's unfortunate," I said neutrally, though I couldn't help the small smile that formed. "Victoria's blaming everyone but herself," Marcus continued. Frederick is trying to file amendments, but without understanding the original issue, they're just making blind guesses. The following day, Maxwell tried to reach me. 6 missed calls and 3 increasingly urgent voicemails. Paulette, we need to discuss an important matter regarding your departure. Please call me back immediately. I didn't. Instead, I watched from afar as the situation unfolded exactly as I had anticipated. Geneva Life's legal team, now fully aware of the patent vulnerability, scrambled to file corrective amendments. But without understanding the subtle technical issues involved, their attempts were inadequate. Meanwhile, BioNova's new patents, which I had helped refine, clearly established their approach as distinct yet aimed at the same therapeutic outcome. A week after BioNova's announcement, Victoria Blackwell was fired. Geneva Life issued a terse press release stating she had resigned to pursue other opportunities, but industry insiders knew the truth. She had been the sacrificial lamb for Maxwell's failures. The media began picking up on the story. Pharmaceutical industry publications ran articles with headlines like "Patent Dispute Threatens Billion-Dollar Cancer Treatment" and "Former Geneva Life Scientist Leads Rivals Breakthrough." Financial analysts downgraded Geneva Life's stock, citing intellectual property uncertainties and key personnel departures. More of my former colleagues reached out. Rebecca, the former HR director who had warned me about Victoria, called to congratulate me. "I don't know exactly what you did, Paulette, but I know you had a hand in this, and I'm glad." That place lost its soul when Victoria arrived. Marcus kept me informed about the internal fallout. They've launched a full investigation into how this happened. Frederick is blaming the patent vulnerability on your inadequate documentation, but they found your repeated requests to file amendments and Victoria's denials in the email system. "How convenient for Frederick," I remarked. "No one's buying it," Marcus assured me. "Everyone knows you were meticulous." Oh, and get this. The FDA just announced they're reviewing Geneva Life's clinical trial protocols after receiving an anonymous tip about data irregularities. I allowed myself a small smile at that. Justice was working its way through the system. The regulatory investigation into Geneva Life's data practices expanded rapidly. Investigators seized records and interviewed research staff. Gregory Phillips, who had pressured Eleanor's team to manipulate results, was placed on administrative leave pending the investigation. Eleanor flourished in her new role at BioNova. Free from the ethical compromises and cost-cutting pressures at Geneva Life, she was able to pursue her research with proper protocols and resources. She called me frequently with updates, her voice filled with the enthusiasm I remembered from our early days working together. "We're making amazing progress, Paulette. The treatment is even more effective than I originally thought when we address the side effects properly instead of hiding them." I had begun receiving job offers from pharmaceutical companies impressed by what they assumed was my strategic brilliance in moving to BioNova just before this industry shake-up. I declined them all, instead establishing my own consulting practice focused on ethical pharmaceutical patent strategies. My first client naturally was BioNova, but others quickly followed, smaller companies committed to developing treatments with both profit and patient welfare in mind. The final act in Geneva Life's drama came 6 months after my termination. Following the expanded FDA investigation, mounting patent challenges, and continuing stock decline, the board finally took action. Maxwell Harrison was asked to resign. The press release cited strategic differences and the need for new leadership to address current challenges. The business press wasn't so diplomatic, with the Wall Street Journal running a detailed exposé on how Harrison's leadership had transformed Geneva Life from an innovation-focused pharmaceutical leader to a cost-cutting, corner-cutting cautionary tale. Marcus sent me a text the day of the announcement. "You should see the executive floor. People are actually celebrating. P.S. I just got promoted to Deputy General Counsel." I felt a complex mix of emotions. Satisfaction that justice had been served. Vindication that my professional judgment had been proven correct. Sadness for what Geneva Life could have been if it had stayed true to its original mission. But mostly I felt relief that Eleanor's life-saving treatment would still reach patients, through BioNova's ethical development process rather than Geneva Life's compromised one. The final piece fell into place when James Sullivan, the board member who had once cared about Geneva Life's mission, was appointed interim CEO. His first public statement announced a return to our founding principles of scientific integrity and patient focus. He also initiated a full review of all executives who had been terminated or resigned during Victoria and Maxwell's tenure, with an eye toward potential reinstatement. He called me personally. "Paulette, I owe you an apology. I should have spoken up at that board meeting. What they did to you was unconscionable." "You were in a difficult position, James," I acknowledged. "I'd like you to consider returning to Geneva Life," he said. "We need people with your integrity as we rebuild." I thanked him for the offer but declined. My path had changed and I was at peace with that. Besides, I was still consulting with BioNova, helping them navigate the patent landscape ethically while ensuring their version of the cancer treatment would reach patients quickly and affordably. The cancer treatment patent, once valued at $5 billion under Geneva Life's profit-maximizing strategy, was now divided between two companies. But in the end, this competition would benefit patients through more rapid development, more reasonable pricing, and most importantly, proper clinical testing that wouldn't hide side effects or exaggerate efficacy. Sometimes justice takes unexpected forms. Mine came not through lawsuits or public accusations, but through strategic application of the very expertise Geneva Life had devalued. The same knowledge they had dismissed had ultimately cost them billions and reset the moral compass of an entire company. As Eleanor told me over dinner celebrating BioNova's first successful clinical trial of the treatment, they fired the wrong person on exactly the right day. I couldn't have put it better myself. 1 year after that fateful board meeting where Maxwell Harrison fired me, I sat on the patio of my favorite cafe reviewing contracts for my newest client. My consulting firm, Integrity Patent Strategies, had grown from a one-woman operation to a team of 5 specialized attorneys, all committed to ethical pharmaceutical practices. The healing process hadn't been linear. There were still mornings when I woke up with a knot in my stomach, replaying the humiliation of being escorted out by security with my belongings in a box. There were moments when the anger resurfaced sharp and hot, when I thought about how close Maxwell and Victoria had come to corrupting a potentially life-saving treatment. But those moments grew less frequent with time and purpose. I had channeled my experience into creating something positive, a consultancy that helped pharmaceutical companies navigate patent protection while maintaining ethical standards for research, manufacturing, and pricing. Eleanor had become my most frequent dinner companion, our friendship strengthened by the ordeal we'd shared. She visited my office that afternoon, practically bouncing with excitement. "The FDA just approved our accelerated review request," she announced, dropping into the chair across from me. "Based on the Phase 2 results, they're convinced the treatment is significant enough to fast-track. We could have approval within 8 months. "That's amazing, Eleanor, truly." She beamed. "None of this would have happened without you, you know. If I'd stayed at Geneva Life." I shook my head. "You would have found another way. You're too brilliant and too ethical to have let them derail your work forever." "Maybe. But BioNova is the perfect environment for this research. Dr. Chen gives me the scientific freedom I need, and Daniel actually cares about making the treatment accessible to patients, regardless of their financial situation." The contrast with Geneva Life's approach under Maxwell and Victoria couldn't have been starker. Marcus had kept in touch throughout the year, updating me on Geneva Life's transformation under James Sullivan's leadership. The toxic executives had been replaced. The emphasis on research integrity had been restored. The partnership with Zentran RX had been renegotiated with stricter ethical guidelines. Several former colleagues had returned to the company, including Rebecca, to head HR again. Marcus had been promoted to general counsel after Frederick Barton resigned, amid the patent strategy fallout. He occasionally called me for advice on complex patent matters, a professional courtesy I was happy to provide despite my history with the company. Amanda and I had developed a close friendship beyond our professional collaboration. As my mentor years ago, she had seen potential in me that I hadn't fully recognized myself. Now, as colleagues and friends, we were working to establish industry guidelines for ethical patent practices in pharmaceutical development. "You know what still amazes me," Amanda said during one of our strategy sessions. "How you managed to navigate that entire situation without ever crossing an ethical line. You had every reason to want revenge, but you found a way to achieve justice while maintaining your professional integrity." That observation touched me deeply, because it reflected the principle that had guided me through the darkest days after my termination. I had been determined not to let Maxwell and Victoria's betrayal corrupt my own values. The most unexpected relationship to emerge from the experience was with James Sullivan. Though I had declined his offer to return to Geneva Life, we had begun collaborating on an industry initiative to develop best practices for biotech research ethics. His perspective as a board member who had witnessed corporate culture corruption firsthand complemented my legal expertise perfectly. The warning signs were there, he told me during one of our working lunches. The gradual shift from patient-focused language to shareholder-focused language, the increasing secrecy around executive decisions, the way dissenting voices were marginalized. Why didn't more people speak up, I asked. He sighed. Fear. Uncertainty. The changes happened incrementally, so each compromise seemed small in isolation. By the time the pattern was clear, speaking out felt too risky. That conversation led us to develop a workshop for corporate boards on maintaining ethical oversight in pharmaceutical companies, recognizing warning signs, and creating safe channels for employees to raise concerns without fear of retaliation. The cancer treatment that had been at the center of this corporate drama was now progressing toward approval through 2 different companies. Geneva Life had eventually managed to correct their patent issues, not as effectively as if I had been allowed to file the original amendments, but adequately to protect a narrower version of the technology. BioNova's approach, refined under Eleanor's leadership, had proven even more effective in clinical trials. What had once been positioned as a $5 billion exclusive treatment was now developing into 2 competing therapies that would ultimately benefit more patients at more reasonable prices. The market had adjusted. Both companies would still profit substantially, just not at the obscene levels Victoria and Maxwell had envisioned. I had learned valuable lessons through this experience, lessons I now shared with clients, colleagues, and occasionally in guest lectures at Harvard Law for biotech patent courses. Document everything. In toxic workplaces, a meticulous paper trail is often your only protection. Trust your ethical compass. When leadership pushes for compromises that feel wrong, that discomfort is valuable information. Build authentic relationships. My connections with Eleanor, Marcus, Amanda, and others had been crucial in navigating the aftermath of my termination. Know your unique value. Understanding exactly what I knew about the patent vulnerability had given me confidence during my darkest moments. Choose the long game over immediate vindication. By focusing on strategic action rather than public accusations, I had achieved more meaningful change in the industry. Perhaps most importantly, I had learned that professional setbacks, even devastating ones like my public firing, can sometimes lead to unexpected opportunities. My consulting firm was now doing work that aligned more closely with my values than my role at Geneva Life ever had. Eleanor's cancer treatment received FDA approval 18 months after my termination from Geneva Life. Both versions, BioNova's and the reformed Geneva Life's, would ultimately reach patients, saving countless lives. Eleanor and her team received the recognition they deserved for their groundbreaking work. The data was properly validated, the manufacturing was handled with appropriate quality controls, and the pricing was set at levels that made the treatment accessible to most patients. Sometimes I thought about that moment in the boardroom, standing up, gathering my things, saying a simple thank you, while Frederick Barton realized with horror what they had just done. In that moment of betrayal, I couldn't have imagined how things would unfold. I couldn't have known that my calm response in the face of injustice would be the first step toward something better, not just for me, but for an entire industry. As I often tell young lawyers now, sometimes the most powerful response to injustice isn't an immediate fight or a public denunciation. Sometimes it's the quiet confidence of knowing your worth, understanding your leverage, and strategically applying your expertise where it can do the most good. Have you ever faced a situation where staying professional in the face of unfair treatment ultimately worked in your favor? I'd love to hear your stories in the comments below. If this story resonated with you, please consider subscribing to hear more professional journey narratives. And don't forget to hit that like button if you believe in standing up for ethics in the workplace. Thank you for joining me today. And remember, sometimes the most impressive victory is the one where you never have to raise your voice.